suis Zoe WITHLEY de Londres. Nous allons en fait parler en anglais, mais je voulais offrir un bienvenue à tout le monde. Et d'accord, nous allons commencer. So, hello everyone. I'm delighted to be in conversation today with Zora J.MURFF, who is here with us and on the precipice of a new photo book by Aperture, which is just there. And so what we thought we would do is have a conversation that looks at a number of themes that have both established your photographic practice and the reasons behind it, and perhaps in a way that can feel quite organic. We can then use images from the PDF, effectively giving you a preview of the book that will be published at the end of this year or in early January, to kind of elaborate some of the themes. And then if we leave a little bit of time at the end, certainly for those of you who have questions, then you should be able to pose them. So, well, I'm so happy to be in conversation with you. And I first came across your work through a project that's gotten an awful lot of attention in the United States called Marking Time, Art in the Age of Mass Incarceration. It's an exhibition and a book, which has earned its curator and writer, Nicole Fleetwood, a MacArthur. So very, very important work. And what I found particularly interesting about page 100 and 101, where one of your images is featured, Jerome at 15, and this is an image from 2014, was that it really relates to your start with photography, because you came to it potentially later than some. And so can you tell us a little bit about that process and what your previous job was?
Thank you everybody for coming out today. It's really great to be here in Paris. This is actually my first time out of the United States, so just a very, very exciting experience. So the work corrections, you're right. I came to photography late. I studied psychology before I decided to be an artist, and had a career as a social worker and worked with kids who were in the juvenile criminal justice system. And so it was at that time when I was doing that particular work that I decided to go back to school to study art. And I think that creating that work was my first experience in merging my interest in various social phenomena, primarily like social institutions, and how photography can be used to talk about those systems, but also how photography exists inside of those systems. And so as a punitive measure, like photography, has played a role through the mugshot, through surveillance, as a form of oppressing people, marking people as criminals, a heavy stigma that follows them for the rest of their lives. Both from the experiences that they have as individuals, but also how the world sees them once they are categorized as, a criminal.
So I think that leaves us right into a place where I wanted to start our conversation, and that was thinking about references that kind of bleed into photography but extend beyond it, because when you were generous enough to share with me the PDF, one of my first reference points was a writer named Jesmyn Ward, who also grew up in the South in Louisiana, and the epigraph to one of her many extraordinary books, Salvage the Bones, is actually the hip hop collective Outkast's line from, or a series of lines from Art of Storytelling, Part 1. And Andre 3000 says, "We on our back, staring at the stars above, talking about what we're going to be when we grew up. I said, what you want to be?" She said, "Alive." And that sense of something being both so matter of fact and humble, something that should be owed to all of us, but at the same time being more than aspirational for many of us, is that double bind that you're talking about, kind of inherent in the medium of photography. And I then went back and listened to that song, and it also has a part 2. And in the part 2, it ends, "All's well, nothing's well," repeated 9 times. And this is in answer to the question, who said good folks is not supposed to die? And somehow, both of those songs together and the lyrics felt so much like a rejoinder to a lot of the empathy and kind of pain that exists in the images, and that there's humor there too, because I think there's also something, however morbidly humorous, certainly there is a sense of our sense of humor as a people, and that being the answer to the question of what do you want to be? I want to live, and so I realize that's more an observation than a question, but that for me was so much bound up in approaching your work with a multiplicity that could then span the narrative art of writing things down or of speaking things into existence, and music. And so it would be helpful, I think, for all of us here to maybe have more insight into some of the references that you bring to bear. So from starting with psychology and being a social worker in the youth criminal justice system to navigating photography, what are some of the other media or reference points that helped you to establish such a unique language that you now have?
Well, I listen to a lot of music, and I watch a lot of TV. I watch so much TV, and a lot of films. And so, this newer book. Let's see. No.
We're not quite sure how to advance
I'm
the
not sure how
images.
to advance yeah.
There we go.
There we go. Perfect. And you can just sort of keep cycling through the images. But the work, it is definitely an exploration of being alive, I would say. That this book it's full of, there's tender moments, there's humor, there's pain, but that all of those things culminate, in this act of living. And so I think that this is the first time, in making something where I'm deciding to be completely vulnerable, where I am implicating myself in, these various systems that I exist in. I'm a professor at a university. More specifically, I'm a professor at a land-grant university in the state where my family was once enslaved. And that's not something, that's like a predicament that I'd never take lightly and that I carry with me on a daily basis. But I can't, I think I found that I can't be critical of these things without talking about my own participation within these systems.
I think that begs a different set of questions, or clearly questions that you were asking yourself. And so to bring in a photographer who I know has been an important reference in your work, Alan Sekula, he had the rejoinder to the famous picture being worth 1,000 words, that an image is worth 1,000 questions. So in your first body of work, Corrections, was it that the ethics of creating that work and of establishing trust and gaining consent from your subjects, what was that process like?
Well, it was a process where I had to be very cognizant of the power dynamics at play, both as a social worker, but then also as a photographer. So as a social worker, in the context of the relationship that I had with the kids I was photographing, I was only in their lives as a punitive measure, right? So of course I had to think about my existence in their lives in that way before I could take their photographs. And, making sure just like basic things of not making images of them while I'm actually working, right? I think those are more of like what I might call like the concrete ethics of the situation. But when it comes to photography, one thing that I had to consider was, these are kids in a system that gives them a level of privacy, like their crimes aren't published or talked about. Their records are sealed once they turn 18, and so wanting to make portraits of them, I had to find ways of masking their identity. That reality made me question, what does it mean for me to take a picture of this person? What power do I have as a photographer? And because I have power, I have to think very deeply about what my intentions are with this work. And so I feel like through that experience, like it had, this was all happening in my sort of formative years as an artist, right? And so I think because of that, I think a lot about what are my intentions when I make something. What are my intentions? Like when I see things, just having to really consider that very deeply.
Well, then you've asked your own next question. What are your intentions?
Well, I think that my intentions are to be honest, really, to not pull any punches, to say things as I see them. But I think that also just comes from being Black in America, where like particular aspects of your life, being in a society that being in a society where whiteness is seen as the rule, right? There are many things like that people try to decide for me because I'm Black. And so I think that within the work that I make, while race isn't always a primary concern, I think that is like something that I think about when it comes to my intentions, that I always, no matter what, have to be true to myself, and that's fundamental.
I'd like to add another one of those to it, because I feel that love is also something that's so important alongside the honesty. And it's elaborated in each of your photo books to date. And I think it's important for us to talk about it because you say, for instance, that it's a kind of love when people who know observation can imperil their lives. And we can come to some of the images that are on the booth that people can see here. But when they say, I will let you look at me, and that it's also a reciprocity in that love when you stand behind the lens and say, I see you. So I think I'd love to hear more about that loving process.
Oh yeah, absolutely. There we go. Am I in control now?
You are.
Oh my word. Okay, so let's just get to a portrait here.
Great.
So we'll just quickly scroll through some things. Actually, let's go back. So this portrait of this young man. This is actually, I took this when I was. This is one of the kids that I worked with, and we were recreating this moment. He was sitting on his porch one day after school. Someone had, as he was walking home, someone accused him of stealing a bicycle. And as he got home, he was sitting on his porch, and the police showed up and started questioning him. And he started filming the police with his cell phone. And as soon as he did that, the officer arrested him for disorderly conduct. And so this was us sort of recreating that moment together. But, I think that, the line that you quoted, right? I think that this is us engaged in that act of love, like engaged in that act of seeing one another. And I think that's like where that idea of love comes from for me is just seeing other people. And often when I make portraits now, typically it's a process where I meet somebody, a stranger, just by random, and rather than trying to forefront our conversation with me wanting to take their picture, I just have a conversation with them. And sometimes it results in a portrait, and other times, it just results in two people seeing each other, engaged in an act of living with one another, and that's all it needs to be.
Can we go to one of the images of the houses under construction? Because I think it can be a little bit easier, maybe more straightforward for us to talk about many of your ideas in the presence of a figure, but I think it's just as important for us to have a sense of the magnitude of these images where you may not see a human presence, but that one is being kind of conjured or summoned. And so with an image like the ones we see here, particularly with the new construction and the timber, one of those is in the booth. And so I urge you all to spend time with that, and not only with the kind of beautiful, joyous images of people's faces and your own face, because something really particular is happening in that. And so I gained so much from you talking through this work with me. So I would hope that you'd share it with the rest of us.
Yeah, absolutely. So the image on the right of this interior of a house under construction, I made a series of those, and I started making them immediately after the lockdown happened, and I was drawn to those construction spaces because everything had become so quiet under lockdown. Like just absolutely nobody was out. There was no traffic noise, no people outside. But the construction kept going. And so that was like the only sound that I was hearing was this construction. And so I decided that, I was going to go like look inside of these houses, and particularly at this, the phase that they were at in the construction was where they're building, like they build like this temporary infrastructure to hold the walls up. And I found that very interesting. And but then, like a week after I made, a series of those photographs, I learned about Ahmaud Arbery, who was murdered by 3 white men in Satilla Shores, Georgia. And a part of the catalyst, other than just being a black person in America, that led, these people to murder him, was that he, for an unknown reason, went into a house under construction and then, continued on his jog. But when when one of these white people saw him do that, they decided that it was a suspicious act. And so, like when I originally made the image, it had a particular meaning to me, which was very, just sort of benign, right? But then learning about that, like those images took on this new meaning, both because of, like what they are visually and what they sort of stand for in that particular moment in his life. But then also how easily I could have been marked as suspicious for going into that space as well. But yeah.
Thank you for that. I think that it brings up another instance that is really well captured in one of your earlier photo books, At No Point in Between, where you speak of the making and remaking of a photograph beyond and following the captured moment. And I wonder if we could also speak about a work that you've constructed, the watermelon image that is also on view here at Perry Photo, because I think that equally speaks to a much bigger history and the implications of not only image making, but the stakes of how those images end up being contextualized within all of our work as curators, as art historians, as arts workers and cultural producers.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, bear with me while I scroll through all of these pages.
Oh, it's beautiful to see through, to have a little
get to it.
preview.
But yeah, the image is currently on view at the Weber Gallery booth, SC2. So you can definitely go see it in person. But let me get to it here. We're just getting a quick flip through the book. Also, the book is also at the booth, so you can see it there. And then it's also present at the Aperture table, so you can feel free to stop by and flip through the book there. And we're almost there, I promise.
It's worth the wait.
Yeah. There it is.
There it is.
Yeah, so, this image I made, when did I make this? I think I made this also during the pandemic. But I was looking for just still life images. I was working on a lecture about still life images for my students, and I came across this painting by Charles Ethan Porter, which is here, titled, it's untitled, Cracked Watermelon, and it was painted in 1890. When I saw the image, I really loved the painting, and then I wanted to know more about the creator. And all of the information that I found, it always talked about him as, like a very renowned still life painter, but every single time his racial identity was also brought into the equation, you know. And you know, a watermelon, you know, has a lot of like loaded meaning as far as racial stereotypes. And so I was
Even
thinking,
national ones, if
Oh,
you don't
yeah.
mind me interjecting, because the history of it actually started in relation to laziness around the Portuguese and Italians, and so it's migrated. So those of us in the United States may think of it as something that is kind of solely mapped onto African Americans, but is actually existed in a number of different contexts as a kind of a symbol of idleness. You know, in high summer, instead of working, you're just sitting there kind of with your feet up, eating watermelon. But the way that it's been weaponized is something that should be pleasurable, but then becomes used to denigrate a group of people is something that has existed in a number of different contexts. So it's interesting to think about how these stereotypes can circumscribe things. And what I so much appreciated in this image, and not only the kind of the vivacity of the color palette, but the resourcefulness of the little fronds that have been cut out of cardboard, that there is a kind of a remaking and a reclaiming of an image. And I think that feels, incredibly affirming. It's something that is just really pleasurable to look at. And I think that it's important for us to also discuss that in your work, because as much as I am very interested in your registers of engaging with fast and slow violence, I think that to do your work justice, I think we also have to spend time with the humor and the beauty and the aesthetics, and that all of those things are part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, you know, for me, it was a way of, you know, considering stereotypes as like these very artificial things, right? They're things that, you know, that our society has crafted, and then we, you know, start believing in them. And so I wanted to, like, in making this work, I was thinking about that a lot. And, you know, for me to make it was a way of stripping power from it. Yeah, I mean, I think that when, like, with this book, you know, I was asked recently, you know, like, who is this work for, or what are your goals, or how do you challenge racial stereotypes? And to me, it's like I never put forth to have goals for my work, like for as far as like other people. You know, the goals for my work for me are to exercise these things. You know, like things that happen to me that I don't necessarily want to sit with, but I don't have anywhere else to put them. But I can put them into an image, right? I can put them into a book. And so that's the goal for me. And then, you know, as far as like who comes to the book, right? My hope is that they come to it with a level of openness and a level of criticality, you know, that can be applied to the image, that can be applied to oneself. But I think that, like, that's the closest that I can think of a way of like coming to like a quote unquote goal for the work. And so, you know, like in this book, you know, I feel like anyone who has in some way lived similarly to me, you know, I think that they might find themselves in some of these pages. And sometimes we might laugh together, you know, sometimes we might cry together. But again, it's being engaged in that act of living.
One of the things I think is really powerful about this image also is the way that it functions as a kind of interstitial image between the images that you are composing and your found images. So this one, you're reinterpreting Porter's source material. But I think it'd be great for us to also look at some of your found imagery and to talk through some of the themes and questions that you ask yourself in those contexts.
Yeah, I think this is maybe a good spread to look at. So the image on the left is from the movie Baby Boy. It's a John Singleton film. Movies that, like, it's a movie that I watched, as a teenager, and it's definitely, like, in rotation often in the studio. But this moment in particular, there's, like, a through line where the mother character, she is making a garden in her backyard, and as Jody, the main character, as his arc becomes resolved, so does hers through the garden, and then they meet in the garden, and they have a moment where it's like where they come to sort of an understanding of one another. And so I feel like a lot of the references that I put into this, are moments that I've lived myself. I remember, I think when I turned 27, it dawned on me that I was the age that my mom was when she had me. And so a lot of, like, the angst and whatever that I, like, resentments, all of that I sort of carried, and had towards her, it was in that moment realizing, like, fuck, she was young when she had me. And so, of course, maybe she didn't do, a lot of things, like, in the right way, so to speak. But she was doing the best that she could. And I remember, like, having that realization and calling her up, and we talked about that. But it was, to me, really similar to this moment. And so, I wanted to include that in the book. And then the image on the right, so the image that serves as the background, that's actually the first portrait that I made for the series Corrections. And there's this Polaroid, kind of juxtaposed on top of that image of a toddler, like, waving at whoever is taking this photograph. And so I feel like, whether I'm making an image, whether I'm finding an image, I'm often seeking to, like, I think seeking pieces of myself in these moments. But I feel like that is something that we all do, as people who consume visual culture, that we often are looking for ourselves. I'm sure all of us have, a character in mind, whether it's in a book or a movie or a TV show that we sort of relate to. And so, I think, like, the action of taking those images and placing them here is just me, like, doing that in a very public way, I suppose.
How long did it take you to come up with what we've ended up with here, to think through effectively an exhibition in a book, to compose the juxtapositions and to think about the interplay of images and how the ones you've taken would relate to screen grabs from films or television and interspersed with the texts as well?
I think this book was 34 years in the making. But it took me, I think, I started working on this December of last year, and we got through the final rounds of design in late July, I think.
That sounds really fast to
It
me.
was fast as fuck. Like, I mean, really, it was such a quick process. But again, I feel like it was things like everything that was in this book. Like, it was just me writing down things that I already knew, and then it was a matter of like, the first thing I did when I knew I was going to publish was I went through my entire archive from the past 12 years of photographing, and I grabbed everything I felt that was like that meant something, right? And then I started, and I think this was like heavily influenced by the pandemic, but it was a really internal time for me, because in a lot of ways, like, like COVID has been very tragic, but on some level, for me, it was like I felt safe because I didn't have to go outside. I didn't have to engage with people face to face. And honestly, there's a lot of trauma that comes with that on a daily basis, living black in America, a country built upon slavery, right? And so, but I think like during that time, like what I did was I made a lot of things, in my studio. I watched a lot of movies, and then I just started like taking screen grabs of things, and then slowly sort of working it in to sort of craft this story that I'm telling.
Sure. How are we doing for time? Is this a good point to open up to questions? Sorry? Oh, okay. We've got well, we're doing well. Okay. Who, in terms of other artistic practices, do you look to, or particularly when the satisfaction wasn't there in your previous work that led you to become an artist? Were there particular visual artists or photographers that were kind of, a North Star for you?
I mean, I think that the book is it's full of contributors. So on the back, it lists everyone who contributed to the book, and so there's a poem by my good friend Terrence Washington. I'm in conversation with one of my photographic heroes, Bill Gaskins, who. Like Bill and I didn't actually meet, I think, until like 2018 maybe. But I saw one of his photographs, which is in the book, when I was a grad student, and he's been teaching me from afar ever since that moment. My homie Jay Simple, wrote an essay. Nick Drain and Widleen Cadet and. Sasha Fires Burgess, all people that, like are my, photographic contemporaries who I love so much, and who I learn things from every day. A couple of my grad students, Nick Norman contributed a photograph. My grad student Tay, he wrote a rap song, and according to Leslie Martin at Aperture, this is the first book to have a rap song embedded in it. So history right here, folks. And then, of course, like the just absolutely fabulous Legacy Russell. And Legacy, and we first met at a portfolio review. And I just remember like being so frustrated because I was showing this work at no point in between, during that portfolio review, and I kept, like each reviewer that I sat with, they kept telling me what was wrong with the book. You need more textual information. You need to provide more context because I don't understand these things. And then when I sat down with Legacy, she just looked at it silently. And I just sat there for 10 minutes, and she just, while she like looked and she nodded her head, and sometimes she shook her head and, like just made some guttural noises. But she saw me. And not once did she say what the book was lacking. And she only told me, like what she saw and what she was learning from being with the work and looking at it. And so, I think from her, like, I think it just reinforces, the value of actually, like, being present with other people. And I brought that to the book, and that's why, like, it has so many contributors, was because, each and every person that contributed to this, they've had a profound impact on my life. And I wouldn't be here on this stage talking with you in front of all these wonderful people and being able to share my work, with an international audience, had it not been for every single one of them. But yeah, I kind of got lost in that. I don't. Yeah, go ahead.
That is a very good answer. I think what's interesting about that answer is that it's incredibly forward-looking. So instead of saying, these are my forebears that have provided inspiration, these are my contemporaries, or the next generation coming up now. And yeah, you more than answered the question. Another thing that came up in looking at your past work was again this kind of interplay. Let's go back to this one. So the yellow house is another image that you can see here, and this is what I appreciate about what you just shared. Was sometimes actually nobody teaches you how to do a studio visit or a crit, but we're all expected to know, or something that's supposed to happen by osmosis. So I think it would be interesting for you to also talk us through this image and it's the way it's been misread, because I think that maybe helps all of us approach things with maybe more sensitivity and nuance than we might otherwise.
So the image of the house on the left, so this is an image that I made in grad school, and one that I had, like, I really love this photograph, but it was one that I had, like, I guess, sort of buried deeply, because it is actually tied to a pretty painful experience. I was in grad school, I made this image, was very excited about it. I bring it into a critique with my peers and my professors, and everyone just, like, tore it apart. But tore it apart in the way where they're not, like, saying what can be improved about it, or, like, trying to get me to articulate the idea, but just that, this just doesn't work. This just doesn't work. I don't get it. It doesn't work. And when I was sitting through that, I'm just thinking, like, is anyone actually, like, looking? Does anyone look at what it is that I'm making? And to me, it's rather simple. It's just about now I think, given the context, like, it stands as a marker of miscommunication. So you have this house without stairs, like this house that can't be entered, right? This space that can't function, right? And it's photographed in a way that is quote unquote wrong, right? That it's blurry. And so it's me intentionally using the camera not in the way it's, like, intended to be used, right? But no one saw that, right? Like, no one could get to that. But to me, it's like, it's so easy if you just take a second and, like, look at it, right? But yeah, that's where that image comes from, and sort of what it means to me today.
So for all of us looking at it, even that kind of low gray rectangle, that's where the stairs leading to the front door would have been, but there's an absence there rather than a presence. So, and you're standing on the other side of the street. So then you're also, I think there's an interesting thing thinking here formally about the various layers of remove or distance between not only the making and the composition of the photograph, but then also the way in which it's then read or received.
Yeah, absolutely.
Are there Are there any images in here that that we haven't looked at yet that you'd like us to spend a little time with before?
We can maybe end with this one. This one seems to be a Paris photo favorite. But yeah, this is actually Widlene Cadet, my good friend and artist, Widlene Cadet. I made this image of her while I was doing a residency in Syracuse, New York, light work, and Widlene was in the graduate program there at the same time. And this was actually the first time that we had met in person. Our relationship was just email communication and digital sort of relationship. But we had this chance to meet in real life, and we just ended up walking around and talking for a few hours. And her afro, the hoops, the way she was dressed, she actually reminded me a lot of my mom when she was younger, and so I asked her if I could make this image of her, sort of after my mom, and she was open to it, and it's like, to me it's a recreation of one of the very first memories that I have of my mom, and so she was down to do it, and it resulted in I would say probably one of the best photos I've ever taken.
It's beautiful. I feel like that's a good moment. If any of you all have questions, then I think we can, don't know, maybe I need to give you my mic. I don't know how it works. Is that all right? Oh, so we have two. Oh, it's just coming. Yeah. Thank you. This way your voice can be heard when it's played back.
Thank you for this conversation. I did get a chance to look at both books that you have in front of you. And in the first one, it's more traditional, more straightforward. And in the second one, there's sort of an explosion of the use of documents and images that you did not make. Can you elaborate a bit on this and why you felt the need to give so much space to an archival approach to the document?
Yeah, I think it just stems back to really just questioning my practice as an artist. My friend, American artist, he made an Instagram post like right when I was starting to work on the book. And he said, I can't remember it exactly, but he talked about, once we leave these institutions, certain ways of practicing art coming back to you, and wondering, how many pieces of our natural inclinations as artists are, sort of beat down inside of an institution, and then what are those things that start to resurface once you're sort of outside of it and on your own. And I think that that quote really, what he wrote, really had an effect on me, because I was in the moment of experiencing that. So not to talk shit about my own work, right? But yeah, that book is very sort of traditional, right? And it was made in this way of you're supposed to go out into the world and take photographs, and then you create a body of work, and then you publish it as a book. And you maybe have some shows of it. And I think I was definitely making that way because of the environment I was in while I was making that work. But this work was just the newer book. It was just pure opportunity, and an opportunity just to do things drastically different. And if we're being quite honest, I don't consider that the new book a body of work. It's it's me giving myself an early career retrospective. But that, that I just, in all of this, like, I just want to be an artist. I just want to make art. And really that's all that it's about for me. And yeah, I wanted to do something that was different and that I didn't know how to do yet. And yeah, that's the result. Thank you.
There's a question over there. And to be fair to that earlier book, it is an award-winning book. It's a fantastic book.
Congratulations for your work, and also there's something very interesting about your practice. So I have a question, maybe Zoe touched a little bit on that, which is there is a double bassman and composer in New York, William Parker, who said that the best way to pay tribute to your mentor is to find your own voices. And I was wondering, are there people you look up to either within the medium of photography or outside who help you to find your own voice, to find your own voice? And if yes, maybe if you can delve a little bit onto that. And congratulations for your aesthetic.
Thank you very much for your question. I think that, like, everyone, here, I think that's a difficult question. But I would say that I think that they have all helped me find my voice simply through loving me for who I am. There's just, like, particular things, like Terrence. He really helped me understand what it means to use an image of violence inside of my artwork. Like, both what it is I'm trying to accomplish when I do so, but also, what impact that might have, and but what impact that might have on a viewer, and really, like, what it means to I guess, like, to take these moments that become iconic. And like, one thing he said to me is, like, we talk about like, if we're talking about, like, police violence against black people, we bring these moments into the court of public opinion, but what we should be keeping in mind is that at the end of it, somebody's dead, right? Like, that person's not coming back. And that person had an individual and very nuanced and complicated life that we don't get to see. And so I feel like, that's somebody who helped me find my voice, right? The students the two grad students that are in this book, they remind me of why it is that I'm an educator. To, like, help that I'm in this endeavor to help other people find their voices. But it's such a beautiful thing to see young artists coming into, like, into their own life as an artist. For them, like, that moment when you see them, like, it clicks where they understand what it is that they want to do, and I can go on and on, but I feel like it just boils down to being with people who love you for who you are, who don't ask you to be anything else other than you, right? But thank you. That was a great question. Maybe one more? Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for stressing the role of educator. I wonder, since you're here in your artist hat, if you could talk about that other hat and the significance of it in your process.
Sure. Well, I think, it's something that while I can talk about it or categorize it as an independent thing, being an educator, being a professor, it's very much just a fundamental part of who I am as an artist. And I think that, for me, being in this role of helping people actualize, what it is they want to do. It's just so, to me, it's invaluable. These are like invaluable experiences. And I go back to my own experiences as a student. The very first time I had to write an artist statement, my professor, Margaret Stratton, she sat with me in the photo lab for 2 hours and just pulled it out. And then she did the most gangster shit at the end. She stood up and she's like, "You had the answer the entire time." And then she just left. And that was like, I was blown away. I was like, oh yeah, you're right. Like, you just asked me questions and then you told me to write things down. And so, like that all of this exists inside of us, that we know what it is that we want to do, but sometimes we just need some guidance on how to get to that point. But yeah, I think that's why I'm an educator. But it's again, I don't necessarily see that as independent from me being an artist. Yeah, thank you.
I think it remains for me to thank everyone for coming, and our translators for having worked very, very hard in difficult circumstances, and particularly to Shoair for having curated such a tremendous section of the fair. I've learned so much, so thank you. And Zora, thank you for your time
Thank
and
you so much.
giving so much.
Yeah.